parents, the child goes to the teacher who will guide that child.
What do you mean by external moral authority? You use that expression a lot.
Materialism has to do with when you are
Hello, it's great to have all of you back in the series entitled The Course in Values and Spirituality. I have Sister Denise with me here in the studio, who has been sharing what she meant when she wrote this book some 10 to 15 years ago. We are currently in book 1 and very specifically page 26, and today we will be looking at the subject of the conscience. Sister Denise has mentioned the conscience before and has described it in a little detail, but in this particular episode I would like to fully go into the aspects of the conscience with her, what it is, what it means, what it doesn't mean, and how it impacts on our lives, and how it affects our understanding of values and spirituality. Sister Denise, it's wonderful to have you back.
Thank you.
Moral conscience is the basis of values. That's your title on page 26 at module 131. What do you mean?
You know, it's a very subtle thing, the conscience. And another or a helpful thing to do is to look at it under the name of different words for it. How do you know whether something is right or wrong? How do you know whether something is true or false? If you see a picture on a wall and it's crooked, you'll know, and it'll disturb you. And you'll go to that picture and you'll straighten it, right? Mm-hmm. And there's something about this horizontality that makes you feel right. So you have a relationship with horizontality. And when the thing is crooked, it distresses you, disturbs you, and you just want to put it right. To me, the conscience is an internal mechanism which is set to what's right. And anytime something is not right, it just wants to put it right. Now, it has been corrupted by what we want to call materialism. And we've been talking about this along the way. Materialism has to do with when you are seeing something through your sense perception, your eyes, and you say, that thing, that person, that place is beautiful, and it sets up a desire to have it. Sometimes you want something to gratify a desire, a sense pleasure. You see an ice cream. You know that you're allergic to dairy, but that ice cream looks really good.
And if someone offers it to you
with a lot of love,
indeed,
it'll override what you know better, what you know are going to be the consequences, and you'll do it anyway because of the attraction of the sense perception. And your conscience is the mechanism inside that will tell you, well, if you eat that ice cream, you're going to have an allergic reaction. You've been spending all this energy losing weight. If you do that, it'll be counterproductive. You have all of these arguments that are coming, but the attraction of the taste and the wanting to be socially correct, and you will do it anyway. And then you will pay. And you will say, oh, if only I hadn't had it, you know. And so for us to change that willingness to go for what's attractive rather than what's good requires what we may want to call strength of character, or commitment to oneself. and putting that as a higher priority over the attraction or over wanting to be socially acceptable or all of these things. And I mean, our socialization, our training in life is very strong, and it gets us to do that which is not good for us. And to reverse that requires an immense discipline. But the conscience, when it is really strong and when you love it and you give it value, you hold it in high esteem, you follow it, you give it a position of importance and priority, then only there can be that change.
I find it curious that you say that, because most of us do not ask ourselves, what is my relationship with my own conscience?
Right.
Okay? We tend to treat it as a nagging voice telling you, do this, don't do that. But this is a totally new concept for many of you, that you should have a relationship with your own conscience, and not just a relationship, a special relationship. One has to be very internally directed to do this.
I think yes, and we have to put ourselves as the number one. And normally the message we get from the moral authorities is, well, that's very selfish.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there. You used this expression before. I'd like you to define it for the viewer. What do you mean by external moral authority?
In the world, a child is viewed as someone who needs to be adjusted and set. And so the parents are the ones who have to guide and direct that child. From the parents, the child goes to the teacher, who will guide that child to fit with the society. And then the religious leaders will also guide that child to fit with the traditions and the taboos of that society. And these are the external moral authorities. These are the people who say, you should not trust your conscience, trust us. We know better.
That has caused damage?
What I feel is that it has caused damage, because the morality, and I examined morality rather closely to see, where it comes from, who decided it, why, under what circumstances, at what period of time, and how is it applied, how is it enforced, what's this all about. And it has to do with people's beliefs, people's perception, the philosophers, the origins of the religions, the religious books, and so on and so forth. All of these have given their messages. And what I feel is that they have seen humanity from a physical angle. And what I think we have lost, and what I think maybe since thousands of years we failed to grasp, what the human spirit is. And in the absence of that grasp, we did whatever we could. And in the early period of time, it worked. But as time has gone by, gradually we have found that it has actually failed us. And all of that was in the absence of knowing about the human spirit, and also about the Supreme Being, who is the origin of wisdom, you can say.
Mm-hmm. At the beginning of paragraph 4, you say, our moral conscience originates in the soul, which expresses itself through our physical form. However, because of materialism, our consciousness or sense of self has become identified with matter. There's a lot of words in that those two sentences. Could you clarify what you mean?
People tend to say you have a soul. And so you think of yourself as the real thing, and then the soul as some other thing. You don't know really what it is. okay, your moral conscience originates in that. It's still other, and it's a sort of unknown thing. So the adults who are responsible for the children will say, well, you know, your soul is too young, it's not developed, we're mature, we're developed, we know, we have life experience, we will tell you right and wrong. And that has gone from generation to generation to generation. So what the soul is, we don't know. And what spirituality says is you don't have a soul, you are it. You are the conscience. There's no difference between you and your conscience. So when you're going against your conscience, you're going against yourself. When you are placing yourself under another moral authority, you're placing yourself under another human being who's fallible. When you don't know God, you can't place yourself under God. Some people, they have belief in God, they have faith, they place themselves under God, but it's still not quite clear. So the external religious authorities will say, well, we know God, we will guide you. Or if it's parents, you see. So there isn't enough information. Now, with spirituality, with the possibility of access to God, direct access to God, you can say, okay, well now let me see. If I can have direct access to God, what does that do? First thing it does is it gives you access to spiritual strength. When you have access to spiritual strength, there's also a purification process that happens.
What does that mean?
What that means is that the conscience, instead of being dull, becomes sharp. Instead of being fuzzy, becomes clear.
The conscience is mercurial then?
What I think is that over a long period of time, when the spirit becomes weak and you start doing action against the inner voice, which is another word for the conscience, you start doing karma, which is against yourself, and it causes that inner mechanism to lose functionality, which means you can't rely on it. And that puts you in a position where you have to rely on external moral authorities, and so you devolve your own power to other people, and you then say, well, they told me to do it like this, and if it went wrong, it's their fault. It's not my fault. And you absolve yourself of responsibility, and you go into this downward spiral, which ultimately results in loss of morality. What people call loss of values, loss of morality, is not because you're bad, but it's this consequence of having moved further and further away from yourself, having become weaker and weaker, and having done many things against yourself. So all the odds are stacked to continue in that direction in an exponential way. So it becomes a crisis, and it's called a crisis of values. Sometimes it's called a crisis of conscience. But whatever you want to call it, the solution is come back to yourself. And coming back to yourself and seeing yourself and what has happened to you is maybe quite a big shock or quite a scary thing, but it's still better than not doing it. And so now we're talking about a process of what I call purification. Okay, the soul got totally out of whack, but let's get it back into whack. It got totally out of focus, let's get it in focus, and begin the step-by-step process of following that voice. It starts to regain its functionality, begin to take responsibility, see yourself as, I am the conscience, I am the spirit, I am this, I'm not the body, and I am connected with the divine. And then make that connection strong so that you're absorbing that purifying energy into yourself, and you then start to function naturally in a way that corresponds to the original qualities of the soul. And then you don't need somebody to tell you what's right and wrong. You know. So you can be then self-monitoring. You don't need an external force to enforce their morality on you.
Your take on how to achieve what you just said is contained at the top of page 27, which reads, "The first step in re-establishing a spiritual foundation for our values is to shift our sense of identity from matter to spirit or soul conscious awareness." Okay, for many of our viewers, this is news, okay, because from the time we were old enough to understand, some member of the family took us to a mirror and said, "Look, you're a little boy or a little girl." And that belief has become so entrenched in all of us. And now what you are saying is that before you can get your conscience to work for you, you have to shift your identity. Tell us how. We need far more information.
I think you can call it a belief, but what I would say is it's a perception. And I think my point is that your perception is deceiving you. So you will make a conclusion based on a sense perception. Say, okay, look, you're a little boy. What proves that you're a little boy is you have the body of a little boy, which means you are a body. And what I'm saying is, you have a body. You have the body of a little boy. But what you are is much more subtle than that.
Even after hearing that, Sister Denise, some may wonder, what's the big deal? What's the same difference? Why is this so important? I am this to I am not this. I am what's inside it. What's the difference?
You know what's happening in the world today is there's more and more people who say, I'm in the body of a boy, but I feel like a girl.
Yeah.
Or there is people who say, okay, the society is telling me to be sexually oriented this way, but I'm oriented the other way. And they say that that makes me a bad person, but I can't help it because it's nothing to do with my choice. It's a discovery. Then there's people who are wanting to change gender or transgender. So the presence in this world of a lot of confusion about gender is actually helpful because it underscores this concept that your body isn't you. You are actually genderless. You know, souls are genderless. Souls are colorless. And one of the problems we have in values and principles and so on is that conventional morality is biased against certain people and towards certain other people. So people are beginning to find that there's a difference between appearances and realities. And they're wanting to understand what is this difference. So I think that the existence of this experience, this very widespread experience in humanity, is saying we can no longer consider that physical appearance is the same thing as reality. And even the development of science has told us that anything material is actually just energy, you know. And then the question comes, okay, what is our existence? You know, and you start to come back to these fundamental questions. Just the possibility of cloning, you know, you can clone another person, and then it brings up ethical questions which people are not able to answer based on conventional morality. They don't know enough information. And so the combination of human experience, scientific advancement and so on is forcing us to consider something much more subtle than had been hitherto considered the end of the story, you see. which is very good.
We just covered the first step. The second step, you say, also on page 27, reads, is to establish and maintain a strong connection with the unchanging, immutable source of moral rectitude and truth, the Supreme Soul.
You know, now I would change that sentence.
To what?
I would take out the word moral.
Okay.
I would even take out the word rectitude, because, you know, moral, actually, if you look in the dictionary, it is the opinion of the majority of humans. And rectitude is also that, you know, you decide what's right and wrong.
What would you replace it with?
I would say virtue. I'm really into now virtues these days. If you want to cultivate virtues, you see, my point is that the present state of my thinking is that we need to make a big differentiation between values and virtues. And up until now, people make no distinction. They say a value like honesty, a value like peace, you know. These are not values, they're qualities, they're virtues. A value is something that you assign to something. You say love is more valuable than truth, or truth is more valuable than love. You're giving priorities, you see. And if you say somebody has no values, that's actually not truthful. They will have values that are different from yours. That will be more truthful. So what's happening now is I'm really challenging the way people have been using the word value by saying that it's actually a misuse of the term. I like to use the word principles because that's much clearer. And if you say, what is the Supreme Soul a source of? Not moral rectitude, but definitely is a source of spiritual power, definitely a source of virtue, but not a source of moral rectitude. I would say that's a wrong statement. But in those days, 16 years ago, I was more under the influence of and going along with how everybody was thinking. But subsequently I say, you know what, that's not right. And then why it's not right.
The second part of my question was as far as maintaining a strong connection, establishing and maintaining a strong connection with the Supreme Soul. What does that do for your value system?
Well, what it does is it says, okay, how you set your priorities is affected by how much power you have. And if you say that your power or your virtue is your values, you haven't understood. So your foundation is your virtues, your powers, all of this. Then, armed with virtues and powers, you go into a life situation where you are faced with having to make a choice, having to decide in this situation what is the lesser of the two evils, or what is the right thing to do. So you have to look at all the things that must be taken into consideration, and then you make a decision that the most important thing is this, and that then is your value, you see. So that the quality is not your value, but it is how you decide. And this is why it's connected with conscience. You see, conscience, the inner voice, the intellect, you know, that sensitivity to what's right and wrong, an awareness of the consequences, it's all something very calculated. So value is really a mathematical term in that sense. So when you want to calculate what is the right action to do, because in spirituality you're motivated to perform the best possible karma given the circumstances, and things are not clear-cut. The hypothetical examples, they're very clear-cut, but none of them are true. Reality is not clear-cut. So you have to make a choice between this difficulty and that difficulty. Which one are you going to do? You have to calculate the consequences of your actions. It's a lot of work.
So thank you. This brings us to the end of this episode. The conscience. I don't know if you have sat and thought about this subject of what is your relationship with your own conscience. It's a very curious question, isn't it? Simply because from the time we're born, we're encouraged to have a good relationship with our parents, with our siblings, with our teachers, family members, friends, etc. But no one actually teaches one to have a relationship with one's own conscience. And so Sister Denise has taken us through what the conscience is, what it isn't, and I hope all of you have gained something from today's episode. Take care, and we hope to see you soon. Goodbye.